Welcome to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and of course a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. This is Elizabeth Townsend Guard. I'm your host. I'm a law professor at Tulane University Law School and the LePage Faculty Fellow at the A.V. Friedman School of Business at Tulane, and I just want to quilt. So today we have Teresa Duryea Wong. She's been on the show before. She's an author. She's got a new book, Magic and Memories, 45 Years of International Quilt Festival. We talked to her about the book and her writing process.
Okay, my name is Teresa Duryea Wong, and I'm calling from Houston, Texas.
And we've been on the show before. And I adore you. And
My
I think
second time.
Second time. And so we're going to talk about an upcoming book that's coming out, which I am very excited about, and I think is a super important book to have written. I think that you did the quilting world and quilting history spaces. This is a really important book that had to be written. So let's tell the book. The name of the book is Magic and Memories: 45 Years of International Quilt Festival.
Yes, that's correct.
So, tell me, first of all, when is the book coming out? So that in case people are listening, you can't get it yet, right?
Correct. So it has been published, and it will debut at the International Quilt Festival this year.
Cool.
At the end of October.
End of October, so you have to wait,
Yep.
but it's super exciting. And who's your publisher?
It's published by Schiffer Publishing.
Now, you've published with them before, right? Is that right?
Yes.
So
this is my third book with Schiffer.
And what do you like about Schiffer? Tell us a little bit about sort of Schiffer and publishing and what that means exactly.
Well, their books are beautifully designed. They're also very photo driven.
Yeah.
Which I think makes for a really nice book. And they, the hardcovers are just gorgeous. So I just think their design element is, one of the best out there in our industry for sure.
So when you work with them, so take us into sort of the process of working with Schiffer. So you, as an author, probably proposed this book. You've written for them before, so you already have a relationship with them. But you do a book. How significant of a book proposal did you have to do for this one versus like your first ones? Was it a different process once you're there, or is it always the same process?
No, I still think it's a pretty involved process. So this book, I spent probably, to be honest with you, over 3 years on this book, possibly as long as 4. And when I initially, the first hurdle was getting, the book is really the story of Carrie Patterson Bresnahan and Nancy O'Brien Quintess.
And who are they? Just in case people don't know.
The two of them are the founders of the International Quilt Festival. Plus many, many other things such as International Quilt Market and other things that I'm sure we'll talk about in a few minutes. Yeah. So the first hurdle was actually to get them to agree to let me tell their story.
Because this is one of my fields in my PhD work was biography, and so there's 2 ways to approach biography, and basically this is kind of a biography of Quilts Inc. and of the 2 women as well. So it's got a kind of very biographical element to it, which I totally love because I love biographies. But there's 2 ways to think about biographies. One's an authorized biography where you're working with people and you're really sort of trying to get their story and do a little more investigation. But it's in some ways almost collaborative because they are telling the story and you're writing the story. It's not that they are the author, but it's positive. It's not filled with friction. And then there's the opposite end of that, which is like a tell-all. Like you don't get people's permission. You're really aggressive, and that's not what this book is. This book is really an homage to them and really sort of helping us understand their place in quilt history. That would be my thought of this, having read the book. Is that?
And I think you're right. I mean, there's definitely the 2 types of biography. This is very much, the second half of this book is very much their biography.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely authorized.
Yeah.
And somewhat collaborative, although I was the real driver.
Right.
So I was driving all of the meetings and all of the, we met many times
It's very
over
cool.
about a year and a half. And I did a ton of research outside of the collaboration between the three of us. You asked me about Schiffer.
Yeah, I have like 1,000 questions on that too. So this is going to be like, we're going to have to jump all around. So you had previously published with Schiffer. So you get this idea. I want to write about, now why did you want to write about them?
Well, first I had to get them to agree before I could even approach Schiffer.
Yeah.
Because I needed to make sure I had their consent and that I had a real story.
Right.
So then I put it together for Schiffer, and Schiffer actually broadened the story a little bit. My first envision was a pure biography, but I think Schiffer had a really great idea to make it also about the anniversary of festival, which is coming up this year, will be the 45th anniversary. So it made it a really nice tie-in to their whole story.
That's really great. It's really lovely. So I love that it's dedicated to quilters everywhere. I thought that was really cool. And I love, like, my favorite part of this book. First, you from the very beginning, it's kind of like letting the quilters that love festival into the behind the scenes a little more than that they may not know, right? That's the way it feels like, the audience, to me. The first one. The second one is, it's got to be in every quilt. It's got to be everywhere, right? This is a book that every library and quilt history space and museum has to have, because it is marking a key component of history. And did you find in your research that anything had been done like this on Quilts Inc. and on sort of the kind of the development, or were you like really pioneering, sort of doing the historical work on this?
There's nothing that I know of that is like this book, because it is very much about these two women and what they have done for our industry, and really in terms of building this industry, they were so instrumental. And today it's hard for people to understand because the industry is so big and so diverse.
Right, and there's so many shows, and there's so much this. But can you help us? Like, can you do a little bit of a tease? So, in case people, first of all, what is quilting? What are we talking about? Can you pull us back a little bit, sort of, to help us understand what this is?
Absolutely. So, Quilts Inc. is the name of the company that owns the International Quilt Festival and the International Quilt Market, and in previous years, many other events. Most people don't know about that, and it's okay. They don't really need to know, because when they come to festival, it's not really, they're coming for a lot of reasons, to have fun and to be with their friends and to see quilts, and maybe they don't necessarily need or want to know the history or what goes into running that show. But for me, I felt that festival is so transformative in my own life as a quilter. I wanted to know how it came about, and why is it so big, and how did this happen, and who put this all together. So
just to pause, help us understand what festival is and what market is, so in case people don't know.
So the International Quilt Festival is held once a year in Houston, Texas. It's the largest quilting event in the Western world. The event in Japan now has higher numbers of attendance, but the two are not equal in terms of what they offer, because the International Quilt Festival in Houston has an enormous education component, and also an enormous exhibition component, and of course a shopping and vendor component. And all of those three elements are the largest in the world. The education component in 2018 surpassed 5,000 students, and it's about 7 full days worth of classes. So just the education component alone is the equivalent of running a small junior college or community college for a week.
Amazing.
So it's an enormous program all on its own. So the two women, Carrie and Nancy, they're cousins, and the two of them were raised as sisters. And this is a lot of their family history in the book as well, and how they grew up. But starting in the mid-1970s, they were side by side forever. Every decision that was made, the two of them were there together. But Carrie Bresenhan is the name that most people know.
Right.
And she's the leader. She's the one that was the real driver in the beginning with Nancy there by her side and supporting her and working with her all those years. So the very first event was 1975. So this would be 45 years.
Amazing. And what's interesting about it is this, you have lots of other voices and people, and help us understand sort of why that mid-70s point is important for us. Like, why I see it as like, it's the new era of quilting. I don't know if it does it have a name? Is it like, what do we call this sort of space of quilting that's happened since 75 to now? Does it have a name?
I don't think it has a name, but I've heard some people sort of refer to it as maybe the second Renaissance.
When's the first?
Maybe the early 1900s,
Early 1900s, 1920. Like, where's the first one? Interesting. So, yeah.
I'm not sure if that's exactly right. But after the bicentennial of America in 1976, it was a very pivotal time that marked off a huge resurgence in quilting.
And some people say that, it's interesting what happens, right? So I see if I get it right, because you're I'm a trained historian, but you're the historian on this side of it, which is you get a really kind of a perfect storm in some way. You get people, because of the bicentennial, people start to get more interested in handcrafts and quilting and all kinds of things. Like, it has a resurgence because of the bicentennial, but then you also have, mostly women, really interesting women who see the opportunity to bring it into the world in a different way. The more commercial spaces, the more organized spaces. Marianne Fons is beginning at this time. Like, all these different people are starting to begin this generation of women who have to be, how old are Carrie and Nancy when they start this? They're young, right? They're kind of in their, are they in their
That's
like
right.
30s as well? Like, they're like, right? There's
Yes.
a kind of,
Yes.
right. So,
Yes.
So it's a,
early career. Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it's kind of got this really interesting, like, the 70s kind of like, we can do these things, we can build these things. Like, they're not, they're building companies, right? Quilts Inc. is a company.
Right.
Like, all of them are taking it into a new sphere that is really interesting. Not that the commercialization hadn't happened before, because it had, but it becomes a different beast, and quilting becomes a different kind of thing, I think, starting with these pioneers in our kind of end of the 20th century pioneers in quilting.
It's what's so interesting about their story in particular, because you hit the nail on the head, is that they're building a company.
Yeah.
And to be honest, they're not quilters per se, the way you would envision quilters who are very passionate making quilts all of the time. They know how to quilt, and they have made some quilts early in their life, particularly at their weddings.
Mm-hmm.
But they are very much business women,
Right.
and they're passionate about quilting. So they're creating an industry where there wasn't one.
Right. That's what they're all doing, right? Like,
right.
And there's a whole bunch of them doing that in this time period. So you get a movement of this generation saying, let's professionalize it. Let's put it into companies. And of course, then you get the rotary cutter, and you get all kinds of other sort of inventions happening that kind of spurs things on too. It's kind of this amazing. So I see it when I'm doing these interviews. I'm seeing this period of time as totally transformative, and then I'm seeing around 2008 as a second wave of transformativeness with the internet and sort of our major stars now, Tula Pink and all kinds of other ones. Every time I interview them, they're like, oh, it was around 2007, 2008 that I began.
And the Modern Quilt Guild.
And the Modern Quilt Guild, right. So you get this first wave, second wave of kind of the modern version, the sort of professionalization, I guess, of quilting in some way.
And you asked me about the International Quilt Market.
Yes,
and
let's talk about that.
That is the event that Carrie specifically founded in 1979. So the International Quilt Market is the business-to-business part of the industry. And when Carrie first began that, it was so phenomenal and so groundbreaking. No one can really fully appreciate this today.
Right.
So people thought of quilting as a hobby.
Right.
And the fabric manufacturers were making garment clothing, garment fabric and home deck fabric.
Yeah.
and they didn't know what a quilt shop was. And if they had heard of a quilt shop, they thought the quilt shop, not everybody, but for the most part, these manufacturers thought the quilt shop was synonymous with a quilter who would only want small pieces of fabric.
Oh, interesting.
So Carrie helped teach these manufacturers that the quilt shop actually wants to buy a bolt of fabric.
Right.
And one of the things that I write about in the book, which is so interesting, is that from very first day one, she would not let any of the fabric manufacturers sell anything other than cotton.
Right. I was going to ask you about that because I found that really interesting. That rule is transformative in itself, I think. Don't you? Did you feel that way when you were researching it too? So explain. So the fabric manufacturers wanted to bring in all kinds of fabric, and she said no.
Right.
Why?
Because she owned a quilt shop at the time, and she knew that quilters wanted cotton. And she said, if you're not selling something that I would and could sell in my fabric shop, my quilt shop, then you're not bringing it to market. So no synthetics, none of your polyester plaids and these kinds of things. And this decision, I have to say, is one of the many, there's like 4 or 5 really powerful reasons why I wanted to write this book. And this decision is very indicative of their style, and that decision probably costs them money because it turned off the fabric manufacturers, and that gave them less product to sell. And if you were a trade show event company,
right,
you were setting up a trade show, business to business, for quilters, you would let them sell anything.
Right.
Because you would be in the business of selling booths and making money.
Right.
But Carrie and Nancy, from day one, did everything for the good of quilts. And in the very beginning, for more than a decade, they made no money. It was all about, and tons of people came along with them on this journey that made no money. It was all about the passion for quilting and building something, for tomorrow. So that's a tough decision to say you can't bring any fabric unless it's cotton, because there wasn't that much at that time.
Well, what's so interesting is because when you go to Quilt Market now, the predominant booths, like who has the most floor space, it competes with the machine companies and the fabric companies. And the fabric companies have these elaborate booths that they're trying to sell to the shops. And I thought about that when I was reading that in the book, of like, this industry would not have been what it was if you hadn't had that rule of 100% cotton. Now we have like an insane amount of fabric, and it really pushed an industry to grow in a certain direction, which is kind of remarkable,
It is very, very remarkable. I mean, it was, putting the supply before the demand, right?
Right.
So saying, we already know what they want and you need to bring it. You need to figure out how to make it. You need to come up with designs that we want. And I will say that a couple of years later, that maybe 5 years later, that rule was relaxed, because then people started experimenting with more fabrics.
And that makes sense.
At the beginning, that was very important. Otherwise, we would have gotten stuck with a bunch of garment fabric.
Right.
And hope that canvases,
It's interesting. And you do see this really interesting trend now that the quilters are wanting to make garments. So it's going back the other way. And they're using these beautiful cottons to make dresses and other things. So you get this, it's interesting to see. I don't know if that's always been the case, but it certainly is now, this sort of trend of...
what happens is that things like this typically skip a generation. So if you had quilters that were very prolific in the 30s and 40s, their daughters didn't want to quilt, but their granddaughters did. And that was the generation of the 70s. And so then their daughters maybe didn't want to have anything to do with it, but a new generation is coming along and they're wanting to sew garments and make quilts, and
very interesting.
Yeah.
So do you personally, I just have to ask, do you personally worry, there's always this worry that the quilting generation is getting older and they're, how are we going to replace quilters and blah, blah, blah. Do you worry about that, or do you think it's just a cycle and generational and it'll be fine?
I definitely think the quilting industry and the quilting market and the quilter has changed dramatically. And I think that some of the younger people that love to do quilting are doing a lot of things in addition to quilting, like you said, making garments and all kinds of home deck. But I think it'll be fine. Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much love for it, and it's such a beautiful art form that it will always survive. Has it changed? Yes, and it will continue to change. But I also think it will very much survive.
All right, so I have 1,000 questions. First, how did Carrie and Nancy respond to the book? What did they think? When did you show it to them? At what point?
Just recently. I just got it. So. So I sent them, Schiffer Publishing provided me a couple of preview copies, so they have seen the final book, and they're just thrilled. In the beginning, there was a lot of hesitation on their part because they're very humble. I think they didn't really think there was enough of a story there for a book. They just thought we just did what we did, and maybe it wasn't all that remarkable.
Right.
And privacy concerns and all kinds of things. But, eventually we all came to an agreement, and I think that they were very much in favor of my approach to make this a story about women beginning and owning and operating a business and all those struggles that they went through, and really trying to show the passion.
Yeah. Okay. So can I read the little beginning thing that you have?
Sure.
Okay. It says, let's see if I want to make sure I don't mess it up. Okay. It says, once a year, tens of thousands of women and quite a few men undergo a pilgrimage to Houston, Texas. They return year after year. Nothing but the most dire of circumstances could keep them away. Their destination, the International Quilt Festival, an enormous confluence of exhibitions, shopping, competitions, educational opportunities, and most importantly, a gathering of kindred spirits like no other. For one wonderful week, the doors open and the magic begins, a magic that has been transforming and inspiring countless quilters and would-be quilters for 45 years. And I think it's gorgeous. Your writing is gorgeous.
Aren't you nice? Thank you.
But I think that little blurb really is really helps you understand what this book is going to be about. It is. It makes me think of like Disneyland. Like if you were writing a book about Disney World or Disneyland, and you wanted to know how it started, and nobody had told that story before. That's kind of the way that this is what this book is about. Is how did this all begin, and what is this? And it's got a nice. You keep the magic and the kind of specialness throughout the text, and I thought that was really. Really lovely and not easy to do. So I was really impressed with that.
That's so kind of you. I tried to think of another event that would have this same kind of passion. And so I write, like, for example, in the preface that I have been going to festival for 20 years.
Right.
And I go every year with my same friend, and nothing would stop me from going. For most of those 20 years, I had a really tough, strenuous job, but I mean, I would put that on my calendar, and I was going to festival. Wild horses could not keep me away. And I tried to think, is there another sort of like-minded event in the world? And I don't think there is. I mean, there's a lot of conventions that people are very passionate about in the tech industry, people that are like fans of,
like Comic-Cons or things like that.
Exactly.
Like, yeah.
And I think that those have some similarities in that they're following, but this one has almost a missionary zeal to it that I don't think you find at the others. And I think that was there in the very beginning with Carrie and Nancy and everything that they did, and people that came along on this journey with them, like Judy Murrah, and many, many other people, like you mentioned, Marianne Fons, and just a lot of people from the very early days. They were in it for the love of quilts.
Yeah.
And they did this for the love of quilts. And there was no money to be made. And I don't think, and I don't want this to sound judgmental, but you would not find a group of men who would, I don't think, would do this at this level. And I think there's a lot of reasons why. I mean, stereotypically men are more programmed to provide, and maybe don't have the freedom to take on a job or that has no money associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
But women did this, and they worked hours and hours and hours and years simply for the love and the passion of quilts.
So let me ask you about those early days. If they're just, are they covering their costs in the early days, or did you find that, did it take time for them to sort of stay, and were they able to cover their costs? And then what were they doing do they need to make a living a different way? Sort of, how are we to understand these early years, and when does it change to be something else?
Well, I don't get into the financial part a lot in
don't.
the book, because I don't want to, it's their own personal information. But I just think that it's really important to know that in the very beginning, it was very much a mission to help build this world, and
right.
And also to promote women who were making this as an art form,
Mm-hmm.
And not just the quilt as the product, but the whole process. That it was women's work, that women were worth acknowledging, women were worth educating, they were worth, sort of recognizing what they were bringing to this art form. And I think that's the passion that they had at the very
Were
beginning.
all three components, the exhibition, shopping, and education component, always part of the vision and the mission, or did some come later?
No, it was all three a very big part of it. And I think that the education is something that really sets them apart. I interviewed about 50 people for this book. And one of them was Yvonne Porcella, who was the founder of the Studio Art Quilts Associates. And Yvonne had been around since the very beginning. And she said, anyone can have a nice festival and hang pretty quilts and bring in some vendors. But the education component that you find at Houston International Quilt Festival is second to none. It's, enormous. And without the education, you don't further the art form. You have to teach people new things and inspire them to create new things in order to keep the art form moving forward. So the education was always a very, very important part of their mission.
It's really interesting. Well, I totally love your book. I'm not going to read all of it because that would be ridiculous, right? Like you need to do it as an audiobook. Are you going to do an audiobook of this? You should totally do an audiobook of this.
I had thought about it.
Oh my gosh, it would be awesome because you could listen, like the podcast, right? You could listen to it while you're sewing. You should totally, because your writing is, so I really like your writing. You know that. I keep saying that. But it takes you there. Like you take us back to either your experiences, that preface takes us through what that experience is like. And you take us back to their childhood. You keep taking us back to these scenes. And it's very much sort of written for the reader, I think. I mean, I really think that it's written for the reader. And I think that it's a book to be read. And I don't think that all books, having been an academic, I don't think all books are meant to be read. I think some of them are not about communicating. So I just really I like the tone of it. I like the sort of feel of it. It's really great.
That's very kind of you. I'm a journalist by training, sort of my classical training as a journalist. And then I went back as an adult to get my degree in a master's degree. And I think that helped me learn to be a better researcher and formalized my research in ways that I really hadn't thought about as just a simple journalist. So I think I'm bringing both worlds.
I think you are too. I totally think you are. I mean, and that's why these kinds of projects, like your project, my project, when you take someone who's got one skill and then throw into another situation, you get really interesting results. I love the people who are computer science people and scientists who are quilting because their quilts are incredible. They're taking their oceanography brain and pushing it into a quilting space. And so I think we all have that to some extent. Like we come from one background and that background helps us influence what we do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So tell me a little bit about your writing process. I've done a series of conversations for my my law students where we've had conversations with scholars and with writers to help them understand the writing process. So take me back. So you got the idea, you made the proposal to Schiffer, and then you're like, they say yes, and you're like, oh, okay. Now what happens that next morning? What's your process? How do you think about writing and the interview? How you just tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes. So after I got agreement from Carrie and Nancy, and then I pitched to Schiffer, and we spent a little time shaping the book. And when we all agreed, I think the first thing I tried to do was a framework. One of the hardest things about a project like this is, where do you begin?
Right.
And where do you end? Because everything has to be a story. If it's not a story, it's not interesting. You can't just throw out, random facts and have people want to read it. So I think the first thing was to try to build a framework. And you can't just start at the very beginning, because no one knows who these people are. So you have to set the scene and then go back and then tell the story. So that was the first thing I tried to do, was really set a framework. And then I tried to work, I had over a dozen interviews all day or half day with Carrie and Nancy and I, three of us. And I had additional interviews on top of that with them alone at their homes. So each interview, I tried to take a section of my framework and say, today, this is what we're going to focus on. And we tried not to get off topic, although that does happen. But I tried to keep all of the interviews on a certain era and a certain point I was trying to sort of draw out of them, and then, shape that into a story.
So now, did you record the interviews? No, you didn't.
I did not. No, I take really, really good fast notes on my tablet or laptop. I felt that throughout my career, I've always been doing all kinds of interviews. And when you record something, to be honest with you, it takes twice as long, because you're just sitting there, and then you have to go back and listen to it and then take your notes.
Right, that's right.
And for me, I can look at somebody and type while I'm looking them in the face and acknowledging, and I can type really fast. So I type notes in real time, and I really like that process better. I might not spell everything right in my notes. It doesn't matter, because I can figure that out later. So I take lots and lots and lots and lots of notes.
And how do you, so I'm doing a really big project now that has, it's related to quilting, but it's this concept of time. I'm in really immersed in sort of the concept of time, legal time, leisure time. We're doing body time, all kinds of time. So I'm curious, so you get all of this material, right? You're getting tons of stuff. I imagine you're looking through magazines and you're doing research, and how are you organizing it? How are you keeping it all together so that you can write that draft?
So my interviews with Carrie and Nancy alone, I printed them out, and it was probably over 250 pages of printing. And then I have all these other interviews with about 50 other people. Of course, those were not nearly as long of interviews. And I have tons of research. I've gone through the warehouses. One of the things that really keeps me organized is Excel. I use an Excel spreadsheet for all my books.
Really? And I've just started doing this. That's so funny. Tell me sort of your process, because I finally thought Excel was the perfect way to keep notes and keep organized. Tell me how you're using it, because I'm really curious.
Yeah, so I set a lot of different tabs, and then I categorize information in those tabs. I used to, in my younger years, I would remember everything. Today, I do not remember everything, so I have to write it down. So for the book on Carrie and Nancy, the first thing I did was build a timeline, and I went every single year, starting when they were young, all the way through to 2018. And then I would, every time I got a fact that I thought was relevant for that year, I would add it onto the spreadsheet. And then I would remember what I wanted to talk about for each of those years. So I didn't let big chunks of information, I couldn't lose them. I knew.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a really dorky question. Are you putting the years down this way or across? Like, which way were you putting? That's always, I know that sounds dumb, but like that's an important organization. Where do the years go on your timeline?
Audio, people can't see which way you're pointing.
Right.
But I put them going down.
So it was one of the columns.
Vertically.
So, right.
Yes,
so like tab A had all the different years, and then you could put other categories like whatever the different categories were across the way. So you could have, and like example of a category would be like
permissions for photos is one. I had a category of quilts that I collected. There's 150 quilts in the book.
Really interesting.
So I had to keep track of all of the quilts and who made them.
Right.
And captions. I had another category for all the people I interviewed. Mm-hmm. And what is their phone number and their address and their email.
How many Excel spreadsheets do you think you have for this project? Do you keep it all in one? I was worried about crashing. Just one?
No, one. I have everything backed up on the cloud. But yeah, I have to. If you get too many spreadsheets, then you defeat
Interesting.
the purpose.
So right now with the time project, what I've been doing is I have because I'm taking notes on all these books, right? Reading proofs, which I had never read. I had gotten away with not reading, but all these different these things. So I have a master list the way you have it, and then for each book or each work, then I have its own separate spreadsheet. And then I have a link in the spreadsheet to, because I'm doing it on Google spreadsheets, so that I could then create a link and I can get to that spreadsheet from the master spreadsheet so that I keep track of all of it. But I have never used Excel for a project before. But I found after looking for all these different apps and research apps that it seemed like the best way to go. Did you feel like that too? Right?
Yeah,
that like
I loved it.
Yeah.
But I also use like Microsoft OneNote and Evernote. And I use that a lot.
How do you like Evernote? Do you like it?
I like both of them. And what I do is I, like if I'm researching and I can save things directly into Evernote.
Yeah.
So like I can link from my Excel spreadsheet into Evernote or OneNote. Both of those are really good for capturing content. Cool. Not necessarily for organizing.
Interesting. I'll take a look at it. All right. So are you somebody? So I just heard. Is it Robert Caro saying that he's a big biographer guy, and he was on some radio show while I was driving. He said he doesn't write a single bit until he gets all his research done, which I was like, what? Like his books are gargantuan. I was that was craziness. Where do you start writing? At what point do you start writing in your process?
I think I'm the same way.
Really?
I need to know everything before I start writing.
Are you making little notes about like, oh, I should add this in, or this is really important? Like, are you sort of having like, because you can't remember everything that you know what I mean? Like, as you're reading, you're formulating things, but you might forget it later if you don't note it. Is that right?
Correct, and especially because this was such a long, multi-year process.
Right.
There were tiny bits and pieces that I might have written earlier. The story on Judy Murrah is one of those, for instance. And I met Judy very, very early in the process, and she was so supportive of me and my work, and she was such an inspiration to me. And of course, she passed away. So I wrote her story shortly after that because she was fresh on my mind, and I knew I wanted to put her story in the book. But outside of those little sidebars, if you will, or separate stories, I wait until I have everything. And I sit alone at the computer, and, it might take me 3 or 4 or 6 months to write.
All right, let's talk about that. So you've done the research, and there's a moment when you're like, okay, I've got enough. Do you feel that moment of like, I've got enough research, I can now start writing?
I do.
You do. I do too. There's almost a circularity when you finally are coming back around and you're not getting anywhere new that you've got. Is that the way you feel?
And also I am a type of person that likes to get things done. And I don't think, you can just go forever, but at some point you have to stop and finish,
That's true.
and do what you set out to do.
Right. Right. Okay.
There are limitations. It's not a 500-page book. So.
No, it's small, and it's got a lot. It's got a lot packed in there, but it's small. So, all right. So you're like, all right, I'm done. Now, do you take a little bit of a break, or do you just get up the next morning and start writing? Because
I go at it.
Go at it, and then tell me about your process. Like, how are you? Do you have your notes there? Are you reviewing them? How are you? Like, when you start a new section, what are you doing exactly?
I, of course, will have all my documents up on the computer, but I also have tons and tons of books and articles and photos and files all around me, very neatly organized on my desk and on my table. Because, it might take me a day to write a paragraph. If I'm really searching for something and I want to make sure it's right and I want to make sure I have the angle right, I might have to go back digging through notes, or I remember somebody said this and I might have to go find it, or it might be a piece of something I learned in a book. And so I have all this information, and that's what makes it so tedious.
Yeah, writing is tedious, right? Writing is,
to tell someone that you might spend 6 or 8 hours on one paragraph is hard for people to fathom that.
Now, it sounds like to me that you write, are your drafts close to the final product? Like, are you someone that writes messy drafts and goes back? It sounds like you're being very careful on your writing from the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah, my husband writes that way too. Yeah.
I don't. Sometimes, if you're really, really struggling and you really don't know what to write, I always encourage people just spit it out. Just write anything.
Yeah.
Because the process of getting it out will help you, and then you go back and fix it.
Yeah.
But I spend a lot of time thinking about where I want to go. This book was so important to me that, I thought about it a long time. So when it was time to write, I knew kind of where I wanted to go.
Yeah, that's interesting. I write super messy drafts that have everything thrown in it, and then it gets cut, and it takes up. I write very fast, and then I cut about half of it. It takes me. I do a lot of revisions that it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. My husband, who will ponder a sentence for I'll be like, are you still on that sentence? Right. So, 6 hours for a paragraph. I've watched it. It is painful to watch because your brain is working very hard and you're really thinking it through and you're trying to get it right. And I don't really do that. I really just sort of throw it all out and then think about it, figure out what I'm doing. I think my draft is a thinking through process for me as opposed to I've already thought it through. It's just different
ways to approach it.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's true of everything we do, right? Yeah. Quilting, cooking, whatever,
Definitely.
all of these things, right? So,
yes.
Interesting. Yes. Okay, so I'm really curious what you think about. I suspect there are people that are going to be like, this book is too positive, too close, too whatever. It's not critical. It's not, there's a few critics out there about quilting now that are like, they shouldn't charge so much, or they should be this, or they should be that. And there's a lot of kind of pressure on quilting to be whatever, and because they're the main deal. So if you're the sort of the leader, you're going to get criticism. And so what are your thoughts about that? And do you have tough skin, or what do you say back to them of the critics that may find it's not a critical, because it is not it is you weren't out to criticize or critique it in a way that some others may want you to be doing.
Correct.
Yeah.
So one of the things I tried to take another tactic, I think, and that is I have heard, and nobody has ever said this to me, and all of the people I know who go to Quilt Festival are not talking about the ticket price or any of those things, but I have heard from staff at Quilting that every now and then this comes up. So what I tried to show was today the enormous amount of work that goes into running this event. Yeah. This is the George R. Brown Convention Center in downtown Houston. I think I put into the book, I think it's about 35 American football fields in size. So
That's
it's
so
an
insane.
enormous
And you
event.
feel it when you're there, I have to say. I feel like
Yeah.
we all have to like get in good shape. Like, you know what I mean? Like you should start walking around your neighborhood and like, can you stand on
Okay.
your feet for 8 hours, right?
Yeah. But so think about this. So they rent the entire convention center, the entire thing. And it's like running a city for a week. So they have security, they have police, they have medical support, they have catering, they have all different restaurants, they have shuttle transportation and buses to take people, they have this small community college of classes, they have a museum, and they have over 1,100 shopping booths. Um, so can you imagine the cost to
It's a
run
lot.
an
It's a
event
lot.
like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something like I'm going to say maybe 500 or more volunteers, particularly on the exhibition side, who are
Hmm.
helping protect the quilts and show the quilts.
Yeah.
It's an enormous undertaking. So I kind of just tried to show that complexity
Yeah.
of what it takes. When you walk in, you think of none of this, and you
No, it's
see
just kind of
that.
it's just kind of magical. I mean, it's
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And
interesting.
I will also add, if there are critics who want to know, if anyone goes and enjoys the exhibition part of the International Quilt Festival, that is a uh, 0% profit center.
And
There's no
huge,
money.
so huge, like so huge. It takes days
So
to get through
huge.
it, right?
It's
So if you're
uh,
really doing it right, it's going to take a really long time. As you said, there's no money being made on that side. Over half, is an
half.
exhibition of material. I
Anywhere
hadn't really
from
thought about it that way.
1,000 to 1,500 quilts. And they're hung beautifully. Every single one of them is hung beautifully. And I think this year, when you see all the blue and white quilts, it's just going to be awe-inspiring.
I think the other question I had coming out of it is how now we've got all these different shows and different places. We've got Paducah and we've got what is the Road to California. We've got all these different shows that now happen. And I'm wondering how much of that was happening before Quilts Inc. started. Like, do we have the vibrant industry of shows that we have because of Quilts Inc.? Do you think it's a legacy of the success of Houston, or do you think it was happening simultaneously?
I think that Quilts Inc. was definitely at the forefront. Some of those shows like Paducah have also been around for a long time. But as I said, to have all of these components at the level that International Quilt Festival has, with the education, the museum exhibition, the vendor opportunity, and the competition all in one,
Yeah.
is pretty extraordinary. But I think that definitely, not only do we have all those things that you mentioned, which are big, tons and tons of individual quilt guilds have their own shows.
Yes.
So there's a lot of opportunities, and still a lot of passion out there for quilting events.
All right. Well, we're at getting towards the end of the hour, so help us understand, for those out there who've never been there, why travel to Houston? Like, what is it about Houston? Now, I love the intro, so they should just buy your book, because then they're going to want to like go because it really does capture what it is.
Yeah.
And I've been twice now, and I totally, with your writing, I was like, yeah, totally, right? So.
Yeah.
So help us like maybe close out sort of explaining sort of what is magical about this experience as opposed to maybe others or
One thing that I think today is truly a differentiator for the International Quilt Festival is the international part of it. I have been to festivals all over the US, and I've been many, many times to festivals in Japan. And I feel that what you're going to find at Houston is really international. You are going to find quilts exhibited from people all over the world. You're going to find every kind of fabric vendor selling every kind of fabric from all over the world. You're going to have teachers who are offering classes that are coming to Houston from all over the world. And I think that is the real deal. It truly is an international quilt festival, and for me, I think that's very exciting.
And something, there's also totally, I 100% agree with that. I think, there's one story that sticks out in my mind. My first year, I was on my own. I had research assistants that came and go, but it was at night, and there was a night event, and I was walking by myself, and this crowd of women were like, "Hey, are you on your own?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's my first time." And they were like, "Oh, come join us." And it is different than when I went to QuiltCon. It's different than when I went to other ones. There's a sense of like extreme kindness amongst the people. They're very happy to be there. And it's very, even though they're with their own little group and they've been going for like you 20 years, even you that first year, I sat down with you and your friend and we did an interview. And it's got a very open, kind, inclusive vibe, which I think makes it really special. Whether you're off the plane and you've to come in from Australia or Argentina or all the places that people are coming in for, people are just happy to be there, and there's a joyfulness to it. There's no crying, right? Like, it's like Disneyland, right? Like, everybody seems in good spirits, and I don't know, it's pretty awesome.
Kindness is a very good word for the camaraderie there.
Yeah.
And, it is a very joyful event, and very, that's why I chose magical as part of the title, because it stands alone, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. So even in this world of many, many, many things now, I mean, it's a different world than when they started it. So many festivals, so much. But this still stands out as one of the places you have to go. It's on every quilter's bucket list to go to Houston.
It's a must-do.
It's a must-do. It's true. Yeah. Well, Teresa, as always, I totally love chatting with you, and thank you so much for talking to us about this book and about your writing process. You are you've been doing this you're one of our great scholars right now, our great journalists. You did the cotton book. You're doing things that matter to sort of understand different components of it, and super important to our field and to quilting. And this book will be important for years to come. This will be sort of how we mark what this world is like at this point. So it's important.
And 40 or 45 years is a perfect time to sort of mark a movement, because if you wait much longer, all the players have changed or gone.
Right.
So this is a perfect time, I think, in this 45-year segment.
Now, I guess my last question is, will you donate what happens to all your research materials? Do you think that you'll be able to donate that to Quilts Inc. or have that as part of their history? Because it seems like that's as important as the book itself. You've captured so much, and I know there's not everything could go in the book. So I'm wondering what happens to all that research material now that you're completed the project.
That's a very good question.
I think you should donate it somewhere. I think
that's a great idea,
right? To either the museum or to to the business. I don't know where the business archives are. If they have if they've done anything to have it. I think the business's archive should also be donated somewhere too, so that make sure that we don't lose this history at any point. Right. But yeah, as a historian, that's always my question: is where are those notes going, so that we can see them.
Very good point.
Yes. Let us know what you decide, because it would be nice to know where it is. Awesome.
People can. The book is available if you register for classes on the International Quilt Festival catalog.
Oh,
so
cool.
It's an option, and then they can pick up the book when they get to festival, but it'll also be for sale at festival. And then after festival, it'll be accessible everywhere, like online.
Can you pre-order at Amazon or anything like that at this point? Do you know?
You can, but they won't release it to you until after festival.
Got it. So you can pre-order it, but not, right. Yeah. Got it. All right, cool. Well, you heard that beep. Right. That's the next. I have a crazy schedule today, which is not fun. All right. So thank you so much. All right. Take care.
Right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So you've been listening to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. And I'm Elizabeth Townsend Gard. If you like this podcast, keep listening. Also, we have a Facebook group. Come join us. We talk about a lot of things. We also have an Instagram account. And of course, most importantly, I really hope you get a chance to quilt today.